sign and filling out the grant application. See if my slides are working here. Just as a brief reminder for folks, the Dirt, Gravel, and Low Volume Road Program provides grant funding to fix water issues on public roads. Preventing roads from washing away is really a win-win-win because it reduces the time and maintenance you have to spend on your roads, the money and time for the maintenance, I mean. It provides a better driving surface for everybody, and it protects our water quality because there's less road material washing off into streams, lakes, and wetlands. We did record 2 previous webinars about this grant program. The first one provided an overview of the program, including eligibility requirements. And the second recorded webinar talked about how we rank applications and some other local policies in Huntingdon County. So if anyone's attending today and missed those webinars or would like to review them, I'll be sending links out to the attendees today for our YouTube channel on where to find those recordings. To make sure you're eligible for the grant program, again, review that first webinar, basically to attend a training for that. And then eligible applicants will meet with the Conservation District to look at some specific roads and discuss some potential projects. Then applicants submit their application by June 30th of 2021. And then there are 2 separate boards over a couple of months that will rank all of the grant applications and decide which ones are funded each year. If your project ranks high enough to be funded, you'll sign a contract in late 2021, do the road construction project in 2022, and be reimbursed after construction is completed in 2022. And then next year, you could also apply for another grant and just continue to enjoy your road. So that's the overall process. Since it's spring of 2021, we're in that pre-application phase right now. So again, today's webinar will be talking about specifically how to design road projects and then fill out the grant application. So I want to start with just a brief overview of what the application includes. Thankfully, it's just 1 short page, front and back. The back of the page is a space to do a sketch of your project. You do have to attach a location map, as well as a cost estimate, which you sometimes can fit on the 1 page, but most folks like to use additional pages to write out the cost estimate with more detail. And a few additional forms that may be needed are a traffic count for the low traffic volume roads to verify they do have that low traffic, and a consent form from landowners for any work outside of the public road right of way. Later in the presentation, I'll go through all of these items in more detail, but just to get started, that's what the application looks like front and back. And that's what the additional cost estimate sheet looks like. And usually folks submit 2 of those, one for the grant requested items and one to show what they'd be paying for with any in-kind contributions. If you're able to design a good project, filling out the grant application will be much easier. So this is what I'd like to spend most of our presentation today on.
Hey everybody, looks like we may have lost Sherry. I'm not sure what happened. If we had a power bump at the office. So just bear with us for a minute. I'm gonna see if we can get her back online. Oh, thank you for the text. Okay, looks like she's back.
The internet just turned itself off and it came back on. So I apologize about that. Let's get my email off the screen there. Can you still see my presentation there, Selena?
Nope, we don't see the presentation right now.
Hit that button again. So sorry, everybody. I guess it was too much to ask to make it through 3 whole weeks without any technical glitches. How about now? Can you see that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure where everybody else lost you, but
go back.
I would say start this. Yeah, I would go back to the project design. That's where I lost you.
Okay, I am sorry about that. We'll redo this slide. Selena, are we still recording?
We are. I'll try to clip that out.
No problem. All right, so What I had hoped for you all to hear before was that if you're able to do a good job designing your road projects, it makes putting it on the grant application paperwork a whole lot easier. So this is really what I'm going to be talking about today. So when you're designing a road project, you obviously have to go look at the road, identify the issues on the road, come up with solutions for those problems, and take some measurements. And I have those all boxed out because those are things I kind of do all at the same time, specifically when I meet with folks at pre-application meetings. Although anyone who has a background in road work or is just more familiar with the grant program can obviously do some of this work on your own. I know some folks like to kind of draft a grant application and then discuss it with me when we meet on the road, and that's fine as well. Once you gather all that information, you can use it to estimate material quantities for your road project. Once you know what materials you need, you can get a cost estimate, and then putting all of that on the grant application becomes pretty easy. So we'll start at the top here. When we meet on the road, I have a list of equipment I like to take with me, starting with a wheel and a tape measure to make sure we can take measurements on the road. I also like to bring along something like marking paint, flags, stakes. These aren't necessarily marks you would make on the road that would last all the way out until you do construction. But if you're going to be going back to the road a few different times as you lay out your project and come up with ideas, it can be useful to mark, where you're going to install a new pipe or something like that, especially if you want to remember an area to talk to a landowner about, or me, or something like that. Definitely have some way to take notes, like a pen, paper, and clipboard. That's the first step, honestly, in doing your grant application. Just taking some notes when you're looking at the road is the first step to putting all of your ideas down on paper, and will be really helpful to have good notes from your meetings. And there's also this little environmentally sensitive road maintenance field book. Folks will be attending an ESM training before applying for the grant, and everyone who attends that training will receive one of these booklets, either in person or in the mail, depending on if you attend in person or virtually. And they may be an underused resource, but they have a lot of really helpful information for laying out road projects. And I don't have a picture of a camera here. I always take photos when I look at road projects, so I remember what they look like and can share those photos with the boards who rank and approve the funding for the projects. But you might want to take pictures in case it rains a lot and you want to see where it's flooding, or if there's a groundwater seeping up on your road and it only does that a couple months out of the year, you might want to be taking pictures of that kind of stuff. So you remember where things are at and what your road looks like, and that can help you in designing your road project or even talking to landowners. The next part's probably the easiest. What are the problems on your road? Wet spots, soft spots, potholes, probably all know where those are at. Failing pipes, you want to assess the condition of every cross pipe or drainage installation in your road, see if it's rusting or cracked or plugged up. Safety concerns are obviously things we need to address, like really deep roadside ditches or unstable road banks. And if there's any impacts from outside the public road right of way, such as water coming off a driveway, those are things to take notice of so we can address them as well. I have some example photos here. So this is a road that is the low spot. And so every time it rains, water collected on this road and ran down the surface, washing away the gravel. That's a problem. So you want to take note of that to fix it. Here's a really deep eroded ditch, like I mentioned, a cross pipe that's all clogged up with dirt and crushed at the end because it didn't have a good head wall or end wall on there. And some wet spots. These are really great to see this time of year in the spring when we have melting snow and lots of rain. Groundwater can pop up anywhere, especially on our edges of our roads. And they'll wash away the fine particles that hold your road together. And so you can see these individual larger loose rocks, which will then traffic can pop those out of the road, you get a pothole there. So this is a good indication you have some groundwater you want to deal with when you're designing your road project. Similarly here, you can see there's a wet spot on the edge of the road that's actually saturating out into the middle of the road as well. And so those are the kinds of things you want to take notice of so that you can fix them. Sometimes people have trouble coming up with solutions for the grant money because they teach you all about dealing with water on your roads at that training. This is the website where you sign up for that. It's the Center for Dirt and Gravel Road Studies through Penn State. And again, they'll be providing you that field book so that you can have a reference when you're out in the field looking at your roads themselves. I am getting a notification that my internet is unstable, so I hope I don't lose you all again here soon. Can everybody still see and hear me okay? Got a nod and a thumbs up, great. Oh, I had some pictures of the book when you open it. zooming in there, it has chapter 1, keys to diagnosing road problems. So if you're out and you're looking on your road and you see a wet spot and you forget how to fix it, check the book because it will tell you and remind you, and that's really helpful. And of course, I'm a resource at the Conservation District. That's why we meet with you before you put your grant application in, so we can help you come up with some solutions and brainstorm what needs to be done there and which solutions meet the grant program requirements and policies. So we have example photos here too. This is that same road before that was washing out, but now they built it up and reshaped it so water flows off the sides of the road instead of down the surface. We did that with shale, building up the road base. Although if you don't have a good spot to build up your road and you just have like a little kind of artificial berm on the downhill side, I apologize, I didn't have a good photo of this, but anytime you plow your road or traffic goes by, some gravel can build up on the edge of the road. And sometimes that's all that's trapping the water on your road. So that's another thing to take notice of, because if you just remove that berm, that can have a similar effect as building up the road in certain circumstances. You don't have enough drainage or your pipes are failing, you want to be installing new pipes with some nice head walls and end walls like we see here. Under drain is a great way to deal with groundwater. Water will seep into the space between these rocks and into this perforated pipe, and then you can direct that water away from your road without the road being soft and unstable because it's captured in this drainage structure. This felt-like material wraps around the drainage to keep dirt out so it doesn't get clogged up. So that's a really simple and helpful way to deal with groundwater on your roads. And then in addition to all of that thinking you're doing on the road, you want to actually take some measurements. This is another really good step to putting those thoughts and ideas down on paper. So again, I like to use a wheel to create stationing, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Basically, it's just a handheld wheel, if anyone's unfamiliar with that. I don't have a super zoomed in picture, but as you walk along, it measures every foot that you walk, and it will give you a total distance that you've walked. This picture here is just by like a signpost that you can take note of how many feet down the road you have an existing pipe or want to put a new pipe in, or if that's a sign you need to know where it's at. When you measure the road, you can take note of all those different things. So stationing, in case anyone is new to this idea, is really just a way to break up a long project. So if this black line is a road and you're starting at one end and finishing your project at the other end, you just divide it into equal space sections. I picked round pointy pictures here because you can actually take wooden stakes, put them in your road. Usually every 100 feet is how stationing goes. And then that way, when you're driving down the road, you don't have to start measuring from the one end every time. You can just start at station 2 and know that you're already 200 feet into the project. This is often written as, instead of 0 feet, 0 plus 0, 0, or instead of 100 feet, 1 plus 0, 0. Because then when you go back and you're putting a pipe in, you know you can start at station 1 and go 20 feet from there. And then that's what 1 plus 20 means, or 20 feet from station 1. If your project's only 400 feet long, you may not need to do this. But if your project's 2,000 feet long, this can be a really useful way to break it up and remember where different features are going to be. So you can draw in every new pipe that you want to put in, existing features like a stream, where they're at in the length of that. So what we're looking at right now would actually be a really good sketch for your grant application, which we'll talk again about the application at the end of the presentation. But just this little bit of measurement detail can really go a long way in designing your road project. Even if you don't want to do stationing, I always recommend a tape measure so we can figure out how big your existing pipes are and how long pipes are, because when you put them in on an angle on the road, you want to know how long they need to be to get across the road and outlet into a stable grassy area. So that's really helpful information, is to know how long your pipes are going to be on your road. And of course, take some notes, whether or not you put any stakes or flags or paint to mark anything. Again, taking notes at this stage when you're on the road talking about design will really help you out. What you can do with your notes is create a stationing document where if you have measured specific distances on your road, just write down, I was 200 feet from the beginning and we talked about putting in a new cross pipe. And when we measured the road, we need to get a pipe 35 feet long to get across the whole road. Just take notes in some way so you can reference that later. And then when you're referencing those notes, you can use it to estimate your materials. So these are going to be based on those measurements you take out in the field when you're looking at your road, and it does require some math. If you don't like math, please do not panic, because I do have some tips to make this a lot easier on you. Again, if you're thinking right now, Sherry, I don't even know what materials I need to put a pipe in, let alone how to figure out how much I need, there are resources to help you. So don't be afraid to look at that book. And also, if you go back to that Center for Dirt and Gravel Road Studies website, they have a whole page on technical bulletins. Under general resources, it just says technical bulletins. And these are all 1 to 2 page explanations of what a pipe is, how to build it. What's the French mattress? How do you build it? What is driving surface aggregate or DSA? And how do you plan for it? And so if you're struggling with that, these 1 to 2 page little technical bulletins can really give you a list of materials that you can work with when you're trying to figure out what you need to build your road. And honestly, I always have these printed out with me. When we meet, I'll probably give you a couple of these, depending on what we've talked about. So now you take your notes and you make a materials list. So if you want to figure out how many feet of cross pipe to buy, I go back to my list and I count up how many cross pipes we talked about. And hopefully you took notes on how long each cross pipe needs to be and you add it up. 40 feet plus 35 feet plus 35 feet. For this example project that I completely made up, you need 110 feet of 18-inch diameter smooth bore plastic pipe. That's kind of the standard folks use for road drainage. But when you build a pipe, you need more than just the pipe itself, right? You saw in the photo, we build head walls and end walls out of stones very frequently. So you want to make sure you are buying stone to put around the ends of your pipe. And you do have to backfill those pipes with some fresh gravel, such as PennDOT 2A, to make sure that the road is stable and safe and that pipe doesn't collapse under the weight of traffic. And that's another thing that can be tricky. How do you know how much stone you need to backfill a pipe? Well, thankfully, most components of roads, including the surface of a road, is really just a rectangle. So if you think about burying a pipe in the ground, you can just think of the trench you buried in as a box around it. And if you figure out the volume of that box, you can estimate how much stone you need to fill it up. So that's just multiplying the length, the width, and the height, or the depth. So looking at a few pictures, if you already know that your pipe's going to be 40 feet long and 18 inches wide, if you know, just budget a little extra space on either side so you can compact it with a dumping jack or vibratory plate, something like that. Think about how deep you want to bury that pipe. Getting those numbers, you can calculate how much stone you need. This doesn't have to be to the inch. Obviously, this is all an estimate. You know, this can change a little bit by the time you actually go to construction. Once you start digging, you're never going to know exactly what depth your trench will be a whole year in advance. But just this way of thinking about it can really help you estimate that. Now, another problem some of you may have noticed is that you don't typically buy cubic feet of stone. You might buy it by a cubic yard, but more often you're probably going to be buying stone by the ton. And so there are some simple calculations you can do by hand to convert that volume into a more usable number. But honestly, there's a much easier way than doing all of this by hand. Penn State, oh, there's another example. The surface of a road, when you're building up the road base or placing DSA, it's kind of the same thing. It's just a long, flat rectangle. So you need a length, a width, and a depth there as well. And so Penn State has a materials calculator on their website. So you can find the technical bulletin that's in the same area of their website. And so here's the web page. And when you scroll down, there's honestly just boxes for length, width, and depth. And if you have taken those measurements on your road, you just fill them in here. Pick what kind of stone you're talking about, hit this magic green button and it gives you answers. So if you have a 500-foot section of road, the driving surface is 16 feet wide, and you want to place 6 inches of DSA, it'll tell you exactly how many cubic yards and tons you need. And if you happen to know how much you pay per ton for DSA and put that number in here, it even spits out that's going to cost you $6,111, and you can put that number directly into your grant application. So you can use this to estimate pipe, like when you're backfilling a pipe, an underdrain, a French mattress, building up a road base, driving surface aggregate. If you really just focus on those length, width, and depth measurements and use this tool, it'll help you out a lot. You might have also noticed there's a loose or compacted option here. When you're putting in 2A, 2RC, DSA, any kind of aggregate around a pipe or on the surface of a road, it will compact, and you want it to compact because that will give your road strength and support traffic. So you just need to know if you want it to be 6 inches before you compact it or after you compact it, you know, and make sure you're picking that option in the little calculator there. So those are some considerations that can help you with materials estimation. And what I would do is just go through all my notes and do that for every item. You know, figure out what materials you need for your pipes, for your underdrain, for your French mattress, for whatever it is you're building on your road. And that's how you can create a materials list. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know I just lost Selena there for a minute. Hopefully you can all still see and hear me okay. Selena, did we have any questions come up in the chat yet? Okay, so talking along then, estimating quantities is one of the hardest parts for people. And again, I'm available to help with that at the Conservation District. And once you have that, cost estimate isn't quite so difficult. Unfortunately, that is an area that I can offer the least assistance with, just because I don't know how much you pay for things. I always recommend people use their past or current costs when they're buying stone or pipe or any materials, because you know best how much it costs. And you know if you have to pay for it to be delivered, or if you have to pay someone to drive your township truck, for example, over to pick up the material. You know, quarries will deliver stone to municipal buildings or directly to a construction site. And any section of road you have materials delivered to will have a different delivery cost with it. And so at a certain point with the cost estimate, that's really up to the individual applicant to figure out how you plan to get materials onto your site, how you plan to get them installed, and figure out what works for you in the best way to have that happen. If that's sounding like, you know, if any of you are thinking, I don't buy that stuff, we don't do a lot of bid road work, we'd have to hire a contractor, then I recommend you talk to a contractor at this point in your project design. You know, show them your notes, your stationing, take them out to the road and talk about what you want to do and say, how much would it cost for you to do this project? And make sure they understand that's different than a bid. A bid is when they give you a price that they will be held to if you hire them for that project. A quote, an estimate at this point is just so you have a ballpark idea about how much grant money to even ask for. You know, at this stage, you don't even have the money to hire them to do the project, but hopefully a good local contractor can help you out with figuring out how much it would cost for them to do that should you get the grant money and move forward with it. And you just really want to make sure you account for all project components when you're doing the cost estimate, which we'll talk about next when we do the grant application. So that's the next part. I'm going to transition into talking about actually filling out that paperwork, which again will be easier if you've done all these other steps first. So yeah, I don't know if I can check the chat. Selena, if there's any questions that come up, feel free to just kind of shout them out if I have it paused.
Sure, no problem. I did just leave a message in the chat if, to let you guys know where it was. So any questions that pop up, feel free to ask.
Yeah, or if you want to save them for the end, that's fine too. We'll definitely have time for questions at the end. So fill out page 1 completely. This is page 1 of the grant application. So zooming into the top half, this is really just basic information. You're all in Huntington County. If you're watching this, I hope, you write down what municipality you're located in, who at your organization has done that environmentally sensitive road maintenance training, and what is their position? Because it needs to be someone who's at least somewhat in charge of road work, whether it's a roadmaster, a foreman, a township supervisor, borough council member. And you need to write down what date that training was, because it has to be within the last 5 years. On the Center for Dirt and Gravel Road Studies website, they have a list of everyone in Pennsylvania, actually everyone in any state, mostly in Pennsylvania, who's attended that training within 5 years. So if you don't know what date your certification was, you can look it up there. It's publicly available and I can point you in the right direction for that. Then list your contact information and the road name, pretty basic information. Also, what stream or tributary is your road impacting? Most of you hopefully are aware that in order for your road to be eligible for this grant funding, it does have to impact water quality. So you need to list what lake, stream, or wetland you're impacting, what's closest to your road, where that water from your road drains to. And then start and end date for your project. Really, we're just looking for that to be the calendar year following your grant application. So if you're applying for money in 2021, the money will be available for construction in 2022. So if you're not planning on doing construction in 2022, you probably don't need to be applying right now. So that's just something we look for to make sure that timeline matches. Mark off if your road is paved or unpaved and whether or not your project is an emergency. Unfortunately, even if it is an emergency, that really doesn't change our timeline or make the funding available any sooner. I think in the past, there were some counties, maybe some of them still do, approve grant funding on a rolling basis, and that might have been more important, but that doesn't change much in Huntington County when you're applying for this grant money. Then on the second page, there's a reminder that if you need permits, you have to get them. Most of our projects don't need permits, and if they do, I will do my best to help you be aware of that. But you really don't need to be applying for them at this early stage. There's just a note in there. Mark off some more boxes. Are you working on ditches or your road base or your road surface? That's all that's about. And then your grant cost estimation is really the biggest part, which For a simple project, you probably can fit it on these little boxes, but most people will use additional sheets to spell that out. Regardless of where you put the details, I always ask that you fill in this little box on the lower left-hand corner of the grant application, because I will look at that. That's the number I use when I make my spreadsheets about who's asking for how much money. I do like to have that on the front of the sheet here as a nice summary. And don't forget to sign it. This needs to be someone with signing authority for the applying applicant. So that can be, again, a roadmaster, a borough council member, a road foreman, a land manager, supervisor, somebody like that who's allowed to sign off on the project and is in charge of designing the road project. That's page one. The location map is pretty simple. Most people will just print this off of like Google Maps. It can either be an aerial view where you see the trees in the farm fields, or it can just be a road map. That can be nice because it shows at least all the major streams on it. Just something so that when we know you're talking about dirt mountain road, there's a lot of those. So we just want to make sure we know exactly which part of which road you're working on. Sometimes townships will just give me a map of all the townships on the road with a little highlighted spot on where they're working. That's perfect. And a sketch. This is a zoomed in view of what is your road project? What are you putting on that little highlighted section? Now, hopefully you can tell by looking at this and the comment I made earlier about that stationing sketch being really nice. What we have here is not really enough detail. Again, I'll have met with everybody to look at the road projects, but the people who rank your applications didn't meet with you. And so they're relying on what's in your grant application to tell them what you're applying for. And something like this is a little bit too vague. You should also know that when you get funded, your grant application is a contract attachment. So this is the legal document spelling out the scope of work that your grant funding is paying for. So we do need, it doesn't have to be super fancy or engineered, but we need enough information that we know exactly what that grant money will pay for. So here's another example of a more detailed sketch that would be more appropriate. Some tips on putting together a good sketch like this are to show the approximate location, shape, and size of the road. So if it's a straight road, draw a straight line. If it's a curvy road, draw it curvy. If the intersection is T-shaped, make it a T. And if it's not, just try to mimic something that's close to what it actually looks like. Draw in all of your project features so we know how many cross pipes or French mattresses or under drains you're doing. And I know it's probably too small to read, but I'm sure you can tell there's words here. If you're not an artist, please don't stress about this. You know, you can just draw a couple of straight lines and then write some notes. So this says that you're installing 3 new cross pipes and replacing 2 cross pipes. And you're saying what size those pipes are. Then you're saying you're installing head walls and end walls on all the pipes. You can actually just write some notes on there if that's helpful or easier for you. So existing features like streams, landmarks can be really helpful. You know, if there's like a big tree in the middle of the road project, or there's only one mailbox, and that's where you're going to install a French mattress, just drawing something like that on there so I know, okay, there's 2 pipes on this side of the big tree and 3 pipes on that side. That can be really helpful too. And if you are going to be applying for grant money for anything outside the public road right of way, just show us which parts are in the public right of way and outside onto private property. That could be great as well. Cost estimate, again, is probably one of the hardest parts for people. So I'm going to just briefly talk about how to fill out this additional form if you choose to use it. So zooming in on the materials list here, you've already made your materials list when planning your project. So now you just have to fill it in. So for example, if you're putting driving surface aggregate on your road, you've already calculated you need 800 tons for your specific length, width, and depth of your project. Now you just have to know how much that costs per ton. And when you multiply those numbers together, you get a total cost of $24,000 in this little example for your 800 tons of DSA. And you can just fill in every material line item on there. Once you have the quantities, you know, get prices for all of them and add it up at the bottom. And then on the sheet, you repeat that process for equipment and labor, and you can add all those numbers together to get your total grant request. There is a box here that was added just in the last couple of years for engineering. You can use up to 10% of dirt, gravel, and low volume road grants for engineering costs that are incurred after a contract is signed. So if there happens to be an engineer helping with a grant application, the time they spend preparing this is not eligible for reimbursement with the grant. But if you need a permit, for example, and need an engineer to put together a permit application once you have your grant, you can use some of your grant money to help pay for that. So for example, if your materials, equipment, and labor all added up to $50,000, that means up to $5,000 of that grant could be used to pay for engineering. but you've already budgeted all that money for materials, equipment, and labor. So what you really need to do is add, $5,000 into this box and add that in. Then at the bottom of the sheet, just total it all up, and that's how you get the numbers to put onto the front of your grant application there. And again, these sheets are optional. They are really helpful, especially if you are a township, for example, that has your own road crew. So you know how much you pay your laborers, you know what equipment you have or need to rent, and then you really just need to have a good materials estimate. And you can break this out into what you're requesting the grant to pay for and what you might be paying for in kind. A lot of times in the township example I just gave, maybe your road crew and your equipment use is what you're paying for in kind. So you just fill out these two sections of the form. And then on the grant form, you're just asking for money for materials. Or maybe you just, as a municipality, want to use your liquid fuels funds to pay for a certain percentage of the project. And then you can just list that on this sheet as well. So yes, liquid fuels can be used as in-kind contribution on these dirt, gravel, and low volume road projects, as long as you're meeting all liquid fuels requirements. So we just have to work with your municipal services representative from PennDOT to make sure we're meeting the requirements as well. A few other considerations. Before I get into that though, I will say this format doesn't work for everybody. If you're that type of applicant who's just gonna have a contractor do the whole project, and you just have a quote from that contractor listing everything that you have on your project sketch and saying it'll cost one lump sum, you don't have to split it out into materials, equipment, and labor. You can just submit a copy of that estimate from the contractor, and that can be your additional paperwork. That's fine too. But either way, make sure you're anticipating cost increases by the time you go to construction, because the prices you pay right now in 2021 will probably be less than the prices we pay next year in 2022 for everything. So make sure you budget a little extra for that. Often you could just add 10% at the end and kind of increase everything a little bit. Don't forget to budget for prevailing wages if that applies to your project, which I'll talk about next. And also don't forget to budget for some erosion and sedimentation controls, because every project will need some of those, but hopefully not many. So prevailing wage, basically, if your total project costs more than $25,000 and there are any contractors completing any part of the project, they do have to follow prevailing wages. And there's a whole frequently asked questions document about this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it today, but I did just want to mention that because this is the time when you're planning your project that you should be thinking about this if you have contractors as a part of your project. And so when you look at that front of the sheet here, the grant request in this example is $24,775, less than $25,000. However, the total project value of $28,000 is over the $25,000 threshold, and that's the number we go by. So do fill out this little box and take a look at that before you send me your application to make sure that if that's over $25,000 for the total project value, and if you think you need contractors, should you get funding for the project, that you've budgeted for that. And honestly, that's as simple as when you ask a contractor for a cost estimate, tell them it would be a prevailing wage job and they'll factor that in. The wages vary by job, but they're usually $50 to $60 an hour in this part of Pennsylvania in the last few years. And so, I mean, if you happen to know how many hours they'll spend on the job, you can do that math yourself. But again, if you just let them know you need a quote that includes prevailing wages, they will more than likely be able to do that. E&S controls, we always need to think about them anytime we're doing any kind of construction or earth disturbance. That's a legal requirement. Thankfully, dirt and gravel road projects basically are erosion controls because the whole point is to reduce road erosion. We're preventing your roads from washing out by improving them. So there's a lot of really simple things we can do to prevent extra erosion when we're doing these road projects, like not working when it's raining. If we think it's going to rain, stabilize everything and don't leave any loose earth disturbed overnight. So, fill up any trenches where you put a pipe in, don't let those trenches open overnight, backfill and compact them before you leave for the day. And if you do any work inside streams, do it in August, July, maybe when there's not a lot of rain and there's not as much water in the stream to deal with. Some things you might need to include in your cost estimate is silt sock. Again, if you have, loose disturbed earth, like a roadside ditch, and you have to leave it overnight before you get grass seed on there. Storm sewer boxes like this will need an inlet filter bag to catch any extra dirt that might wash off into them. And if you are working in a stream, say this is a culvert where the stream and road cross that you're replacing, you'll have to dam up the water above it, pump it around, which makes sense anyway, because you don't need a stream going through your construction site. That's going to make it really hard to work. So you just need a budget to rent some pumps or build a sandbag dike there or something like that. The number one erosion control we should all be planning for is grass seed and mulch. Because if we don't get grass growing in this ditch, that's loose. That'll wash away, and now you have a big, unsafe, messy, muddy roadside ditch to worry about, and that's the opposite of what we want. So just budget for some grass seed and some straw mulch. On the, the right side of the screen, you can see some blanketing they rolled out there. You can even get a straw mat blanket with grass seeds incorporated into it and just roll that out. Even if you don't think you need grass seed and mulch, you might need a little bit around new pipes or something like that. So just budget for it. You know, if you get into the bank and rip off the vegetation there, you want it to regrow. And that's a great area also to use that blanketing where it's really steep. And if you throw some grass seed and mulch, it'll fall right off. That blanket will hold it in place. So just make sure you have that incorporated in your grant application as well. And that's everything I have to say today on the cost estimate. The last two parts here will go by pretty quick. Helena, we didn't have any questions come in? Okay. So if you're applying for low volume road money, you do need to submit a traffic count with your grant application to prove that it has low traffic volume. Low traffic volume is considered less than 500 vehicles over a 24-hour average period. And so the level 1 traffic count most people do on this form here is you sit by the road for 2 hours and you multiply how many cars drive by in 2 hours by 12, and that gives you an estimate over 24 hours. The vast majority of grant applications use this method and have way less than 500 vehicles in their estimate, and so that's usually good enough. If you do have access to a traffic counter though, or if you think you'll be close to 500 vehicles and you want a more accurate count, you can use one of the automatic traffic counters. That usually consists of like an air-filled tube connected to an electronic box that every time a car drives over it, it will automatically count it. And you can leave it there for 24 or 48 hours and get a more accurate count. Either way, just sign off on the bottom of the form, whoever completes that traffic count, and make sure you follow the directions. For the level 1 count, there are specific times of year, times of the week, and times of the day that you have to sit there and do your traffic count. So I hate to tell you to go do it again if you did it on a Friday instead of a Tuesday. So just make sure you're looking at the directions that come with that form when you get there. And the last thing is that landowner consent for any work outside the public road right of way. We do offer this fill in the blank form. This specific form isn't required. So if anybody out there has their own paperwork you prefer to use, that's fine. As long as there is a written and signed something agreeing between the road owner and the private landowner, who is installing the feature, who is paying for it, who is maintaining that. I really recommend having all of that in writing anytime you're helping, put a driveway pipe in that maybe is like just on the edge of the right of way, but might be on a private driveway. It's good to have that clearly stated in writing, who's paying for it and maintaining it long-term anyway. And so with the grant program, we do require you get that and submit it with your grant application. Because if you're applying for money to do something outside of your public right of way, we need to make sure we have permission before we fund that. So usually we ask for that with the grant application. And that's everything. If you need help, I do provide a checklist that is just a 1-page summarizing some of the things we talked about today that you can go through and make sure, oh yeah, I forgot my location map. Let me get that and now check it off my list. So use that and just contact us. Like I said, the Conservation District is available to help with every single step of this process. I know today I did not give you enough information to design every single type of road project out there. That would take hours. I'm not going to make you sit through that, but hopefully this is enough information to really get you started and thinking about how you need to be doing these projects. And again, the Center for Dirt and Gravel Road Studies website has tons of great information. That's where you sign up for the ESM training. That's where you check last time you attended the training. They have the materials calculator, the technical bulletins, all of that's on their website. That's dirtandgravel.psu.edu. You could get lost on that website. There's so many great resources. And here's our contact information at the Conservation District. 814-627-1626 is our phone number. There's my email address. And here's our web page with the Dirt and Gravel Road tab circled. We have some blank forms and some links to the Penn State website on there. If you need help designing projects, that's a good resource as well. Okay, so with that, thank you all for attending. I hope that gave you some insight into what we're looking for in these grant applications and would help you fill out and design your grant project. So at this point, I'll take some questions if you have them.